A powerful CEO collapses in front of her empire, told she has only months to live, until a humble doctor with a young son steps in with a miracle hidden in his blood. What begins as survival turns into betrayal, sacrifice, and a fight against an old enemy who will stop at nothing. But when the flames rise, one choice will change all of their lives forever. The storm over Manhattan was unforgiving, hammering the skyline with sheets of rain and the kind of thunder that rattled windows. Inside the towering Carter Pharmaceuticals headquarters, the annual shareholders meeting pressed on with all the weight of numbers, contracts, and egos. At the center of it all sat Sophia Carter, her presence commanding every corner of the room. She had been raised in boardrooms, molded by corporate battles, her name synonymous with power and control. Her words carried sharp precision, cutting through tense air as graphs and projections glowed across massive screens. But then something unexpected happened. A pause in her voice, not calculated, not part of her performance, but heavy and strained. Her hand trembled against the podium, her face paled, and in the next breath her body gave way. Silence rippled through the room like shockwaves. Suits stood frozen. Then chaos broke. Assistants rushed to her side. Security barked orders. Phones lit up as frantic calls filled the air. Sophia Carter, untouchable titan of industry, collapsed in front of the very people who thought her indestructible. At St. John's Medical Center, the battle for her life began under the cruel brightness of fluorescent lights. Doctors crowded the trauma bay, machines whirred, monitors beeped erratically. What her body was doing was unlike anything they had trained for in conventional cases. It wasn't a heart attack or a stroke. It was her immune system tearing itself apart, nerves short-circuiting, organs trembling under assault. They tried the arsenal of medicine, immunosuppressants, corticosteroids, high-dose infusions, but nothing slowed the progression. Every minute that passed felt like another piece of her life slipping away. Specialists huddled in tense whispers, their language clinical but their faces carrying the truth none wanted to say aloud. They were losing her, and yet the thought clung stubbornly in the air. Maybe there was still one thing they hadn't tried. 2 floors below, in the quiet sterility of the hospital's blood donation center, a man rolled up his sleeve without fanfare. Ethan Rivers wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. His military jacket was worn at the seams, his boots scuffed, his eyes tired but steady. At 40, he looked older in some ways and younger in others, the sort of face carved by responsibility more than time. He was there for the same reason he always was. Every 6 weeks without fail, he gave blood. Not for recognition, not for the $50 stipend that barely mattered, but because it was the one ritual he had carried with him after the war, the one thing that made him feel he still served a purpose after the day his wife was buried. The nurse prepared the kit, slipping the needle into his arm as dark red filled the collection bag. She almost missed it at first, but then frowned, tapping at the scanner. His sample flickered with anomalies, showing a rare antigenic profile she had never seen. She ran the scan again, then called for a supervisor. Within minutes, the floor above had received the alert. A patient with failing vitals, unresponsive to everything, and a donor whose blood carried something entirely unusual. Ethan was approached carefully, but when they asked if he would consider compatibility testing for a critical case, his answer came without hesitation. "Hook me up." 40 minutes later, Sophia's breathing steadied. The tremors in her hands stilled, her oxygen levels crept upward. It wasn't a full recovery, not even close, but it was a wall built against the storm ravaging her body. The doctors couldn't explain it. They recorded the data, ran tests in disbelief, and whispered among themselves about antigens and immune rewiring. But Ethan didn't wait for explanations. He had been in too many field tents under mortar fire, where life and death turned on seconds, not certainty. He knew only this: his blood had stopped her descent. That was enough. 2 days passed before Sophia's eyes opened to a blur of sterile ceilings and rhythmic beeps. She blinked against the light, memory slipping like water through her fingers. She remembered the boardroom, the tightening in her spine, then the endless fall into nothing. Now she was here, alive. By her side sat Andrew Hale, her COO, and the man who had shadowed her career for over a decade, calm but visibly shaken. He told her the facts in clipped tones. Her body had collapsed from an extreme immune response. Every therapy had failed. Nothing saved her until blood from a walk-in donor was transfused. She had been on the edge, and that stranger's blood had dragged her back. Sophia listened, her voice hoarse when she asked, "Who?" Andrew replied, "Ethan Rivers, a doctor, Army veteran, widower, now working in a small clinic in Brooklyn. He refused interviews, declined compensation, and vanished before anyone could even photograph him." She blinked, struggling to process. How much was he offered? Andrew's jaw tensed. 10 million, and he turned it down. Sophia pressed back against her pillow, stunned. No one turned down 10 million. No one ignored her calls. No one disappeared after saving her life. But Ethan had. She whispered almost to herself, "Get him here." But when the hospital tried again, Ethan declined. He didn't even collect the check. When pressed, his voice was flat, surgical. "I'm not interested in being anyone's hero. I did what was needed. That's enough." The story exploded in the press. A billionaire CEO saved by a nameless donor, a man who refused millions, became a national headline. Reporters clawed for details. Tabloids spun myths. But no one could find him. No social media, no LinkedIn, no press photos except a faded military ID. He had vanished into the shadows, leaving Sophia more unsettled than relieved. She was not used to being dismissed. Not as a CEO, not as a woman who had built empires with her will. She had been admired, envied, feared, but never ignored. And now the one man whose blood flowed in her veins had walked away without a trace. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment above a hardware store in Brooklyn, Ethan tucked in his 11-year-old son, Liam. The boy's hair stuck up in unruly tufts, his nose buried in a book, his voice sleepy as he asked his father if he missed the army. Ethan paused, answering quietly that he sometimes did, but not for the reasons he left. Liam mumbled, "Did you help someone today?" Ethan's eyes drifted to the window, where the city lights blurred through the rain. "Yes," he said softly. "I helped someone, and for now that was enough." The apartment carried the weight of a man who lived simply, not from lack, but by choice. Worn wood floors, mismatched chairs, the faint smell of coffee and chamomile. The walls held no awards, no trophies, only books stacked in uneven towers and a few photographs of Liam and his late mother. It was a life stripped of pretense, held together by quiet rituals, shared dinners, homework at the kitchen table, bedtime stories. For Ethan, it was sanctuary. For Sophia, somewhere across the city, lying awake in a penthouse suite filled with silence that money couldn't soften, it was an enigma she couldn't let go. The first chapter of their story was not a meeting, but a collision. A woman who had built her world on power found herself breathing because of a man who lived in its shadows. And though neither of them knew it yet, the act that bound them was not just a transfusion of blood, but the beginning of something far greater. Something that would test not just science and survival, but the fragile places in their hearts they had both long abandoned. Sophia Carter was not a woman who tolerated unanswered questions. Her entire empire had been built on chasing the things others called impossible and forcing them into reality. But now she found herself confronted with a mystery she could not purchase, subpoena, or negotiate into clarity. Ethan Rivers had vanished as if the earth itself had swallowed him, and with each passing day of her recovery, her frustration deepened. Doctors marveled at her stabilization, charts noted progress where there should have been decline, and analysts whispered in awe at the resilience of their CEO. But Sophia knew better. Her strength wasn't a miracle. It was him. Somewhere in the sprawl of New York, a man lived who carried in his veins the one thing that had saved her, and he had no interest in her gratitude, her wealth, or her commands. That unsettled her more than the disease itself. A week later, against the protest of her board, Sophia left the hospital and returned to her tower. The sleek walls of her penthouse no longer felt invincible. Every time she looked at her reflection, she saw not the powerful woman who commanded nations, but the fragile figure who had crumpled on a stage. She replayed the words again and again. He refused 10 million. She had been in rooms with world leaders who bent to her will, yet a man from nowhere with calloused hands and quiet eyes had said no and disappeared. That word had always been an ending for her. This time, it was the beginning. Her first attempt to find him through official channels failed. Private investigators returned only scraps, a military record, fragments of deployments, redacted citations. His address was obscured, his phone unlisted. Finally, in a move her assistants called reckless, Sophia went herself. She arrived at a clinic in Brooklyn, not in her customary chauffeured car, but in a nondescript sedan, wearing jeans and a dark coat, her hair pulled back to avoid recognition. The receptionist barely looked up when she entered, the hum of a fluorescent light filling the silence. Then she saw him. Ethan was in the break room, pouring stale coffee into a paper cup, his posture relaxed yet alert, the kind of calm born from years in combat. He looked up and recognition flickered across his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "Sophia Carter," he said flatly, as though naming the weather. She stood straighter. "You know who I am," he nodded once. "Everyone does. What do you want here?" She opened her mouth then stopped, suddenly uncertain how to frame a request she had never had to make before. "You saved my life," she said. "I offered you everything, and you walked away. I came to ask why." Ethan studied her for a long moment, his gaze level, not deferential. "Because life and death are not transactions. You think saving someone's life should end with a contract? It shouldn't." Sophia's throat tightened. It was gratitude. It was acknowledgement. It was ownership, he interrupted calmly. "And I'm not interested in being owned." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unfamiliar. No one spoke to her that way. No one ever had. "All right," she said finally, her voice quieter. "Let's assume money offends you. Let's assume you can't be bought." "Then I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for your expertise." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She drew a breath, steadying herself. "My doctors don't understand what's happening in my body. They study charts, they speculate, but they don't know. Your blood shifted something none of them could explain. I don't want you as a donor. I want you as my doctor. On your terms. No publicity, no extraction beyond what's safe. Just you and me." Ethan set down his cup slowly, as though testing the weight of her words. "I haven't practiced long-term care in years. I patch people up in emergencies. That's all." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes sharp but her voice raw. "You were a field surgeon in war zones. You saved lives under fire. You're more qualified than anyone I've ever met." He looked away, his jaw tight. "And yet, my wife died in a hospital bed while I stood by helpless." His words cracked like brittle glass. "That disqualifies me more than anything." Sophia felt her chest tighten, but instead of pressing, she softened. "That doesn't disqualify you, Ethan. That's the reason you care more than anyone else." He shook his head. "I don't want to be a miracle. People put you on a pedestal only to drag you down when you fail." She held his gaze. "I don't want a miracle. I want someone who won't give up on me. Someone who understands what's at stake." For the first time, his guarded expression faltered. Later that night, Ethan stood by Liam's bed, watching his son sleep. The boy's face was peaceful, a book slipping from his hand, his chest rising steadily with each breath. Ethan brushed a hand across his forehead and whispered, "I might take on something new. It could get complicated." "Half asleep," Liam murmured. "Does it help someone?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes." "Then do it, Dad," Liam said, eyes fluttering closed. "You're good at helping people." By morning, Sophia's assistant received a reply on her phone. 7 words, nothing more. "I will take the case, Dr. Rivers." When Ethan stepped into the gleaming marble corridors of Carter Pharmaceuticals for the first time, he felt the shift immediately. This was not his world. It was colder than war zones, quieter than tents under fire, a different battlefield but no less dangerous. He followed an assistant to the top floor, where Sophia waited in her vast office with the skyline stretched behind her like a crown. She turned when he entered, eyes narrowing slightly, assessing him not as a CEO would an employee, but as a woman facing the one person who had seen her vulnerable. "You're punctual," she said. He answered simply, "Comes from being deployed." On the desk between them lay a contract, leather-bound, filled with clauses. He flipped through, scanning the details. Medical autonomy, transparency, confidentiality, access to labs, and one clause written in bold at his insistence. Under no circumstances shall the minor child of Dr. Rivers be subject to inquiry or exposure. Sophia's gaze lingered on that line. "You're protective." He looked up. "He's 11. I won't negotiate that." She nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." He signed his name, the ink drying between them like a silent vow. Sophia watched him with something she couldn't yet name. It wasn't relief or triumph. It was the unsettling awareness that for the first time, someone had entered her world not because of her power, but despite it. And in that quiet realization, a new chapter began. One neither of them fully trusted, but both had already chosen. The weeks that followed brought a fragile rhythm neither Sophia nor Ethan had anticipated. In the mornings, Sophia attended board meetings, her posture as straight and commanding as ever, though she sometimes caught herself gripping the edge of the table when dizziness came. By afternoon, she submitted to Ethan's monitoring. He tested her reflexes, her blood panels, the strange markers that had baffled other doctors. He was meticulous, calm, never hurried. It was the kind of care Sophia had not known since childhood, when someone tended to her not because of her status but because she mattered. And yet Ethan never blurred the line. He was not deferential, not impressed, not intimidated. He was simply present, and that unsettled her more than open hostility ever could. For Liam, the shift was different. Ethan's son was bright, quick-witted, and suspiciously good at eavesdropping. One afternoon, while Sophia waited in the small exam suite for her test results, the boy wandered in, balancing a comic book in one hand and an apple in the other. "You're the lady he saved," Liam said simply, no awe in his tone, just curiosity. Sophia froze, unsure how to answer. "I suppose I am," Liam tilted his head. "Dad says you're complicated." Sophia blinked. "Complicated?" Liam shrugged, biting into his apple. "Means you make things harder than they need to be. But he still shows up anyway. He must like you." Sophia found herself laughing quietly, a sound she barely recognized. That night she lay awake in her penthouse, replaying the boy's words. "He must like you." No one had said such a thing to her without an agenda in years. She stared at the ceiling, wondering when affection had become foreign, when survival had replaced tenderness. Across the river in Brooklyn, Ethan was tucking Liam into bed, reading a battered storybook with calm patience. For him, love was woven into the quiet rituals of fatherhood. For Sophia, it was a ghost she was only beginning to remember. But outside their fragile circle, danger stirred. Victor Hale, once Sophia's partner in business and briefly her confidant, had grown restless. The board whispered his name as a possible successor should Sophia's condition worsen. Behind closed doors, he drafted plans, proposals, and contingency scripts. When news leaked that Sophia's health had improved, Hale's temper flared. He paid for information, hunted for the man whose blood had altered her fate, and when Ethan's name surfaced in a confidential memo, he smiled for the first time in weeks. It began with an offer. Hale found Ethan at the clinic one evening, waiting by the exit as rain slicked the pavement. He wore a tailored suit, his smile a mask. "Dr. Rivers," he said warmly, as though greeting an old friend. "I represent interests far larger than Sophia Carter's vanity empire. Your blood, your unique profile, it could reshape medicine. Join us. Name your price." Ethan adjusted his bag on his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "I'm not interested." Hale's smile thinned. "Everyone's interested at the right number. 10 million. 20? You'd never worry about your son again." Ethan's eyes sharpened. "I already don't." When the refusal came, flat and final, Hale's mask cracked. "You think you're noble?" he hissed. "But she's using you. She'll drain you until there's nothing left, and when you collapse, she'll replace you with another name in her ledger." Ethan stepped past him without another word, his silence heavier than any curse. Hale stood in the rain, fists clenched, knowing he would need another tactic. Days later, Ethan returned home from the clinic to find fire trucks screaming down his block, smoke clawing at the night sky. His heart lurched when he saw the flames rising from his house, his refuge, the place where Liam had learned to ride his bike in the hallway, and where Emily's photograph still sat above the mantel. He sprinted forward, but before he could reach the porch, a figure was already emerging from the smoke. Sophia, her blazer scorched, her arms wrapped tightly around Liam, staggered onto the grass. The boy coughed, tears streaking his soot-stained face, but he was alive. Ethan fell to his knees, pulling his son into his embrace, his hands trembling as they ran across his back to be sure he was whole. Sophia collapsed nearby, her palms blistered, her breath ragged. Their eyes met through the chaos, and something irrevocable passed between them. She had gone into the fire for his child. By dawn, the house was gone. Charred beams jutted from the rubble, the smell of ash clinging to their clothes. The fire department called it faulty wiring. Ethan didn't believe it. He had rewired the house himself. And when a neighbor mentioned seeing a man in a dark coat pacing the night before, Ethan knew this was no accident. He stood among the ruins, Liam clutching his side, and Sophia stepped closer, her voice hushed but urgent. "You're not safe here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I know." He looked at the wreckage of the only sanctuary he had left, then at his son, then at her. "I'm leaving." Sophia's chest ached at the finality in his tone. "Leaving? Where?" "Anywhere far from this." Her hand reached for his arm almost without thought. "Don't. You nearly lost your son because of me." He turned then, his voice rough with grief and fury. "Because of me, Sophia. Because I let us get too close to a world that feeds on destruction. Liam is all I have left, and I will not let him become collateral in a war I never asked for." Sophia faltered, the weight of his pain pressing into her. He turned back to the ruins, his shoulders rigid. This was not just about her illness anymore. It was about survival for both of them, but especially for the boy who had just been pulled from the fire. That night, in a roadside motel miles from the city, Ethan laid Liam down on a thin mattress, the boy's stuffed toy tucked under his arm. The child's breathing was steady, soot and fear replaced by exhaustion. Ethan sat in the dark, staring at the folder Sophia had pressed into his hands before he left. Inside were lab notes, blood analyses, research that could have altered empires. She had given it to him freely, no contracts, no signatures. A gift, or maybe a plea. He traced the edges of the papers with his thumb, hearing her voice in his memory. "I may be your patient, Ethan, but I'm not your chain. I won't hold you back." He looked at Liam, safe and dreaming, despite the smoke that still clung to his hair. Then he looked at the door, where shadows stretched long under the parking lot lights. His world had been reduced to two choices: run again, or finally face what had been following him all along. And in that moment, as the motel walls creaked and the night deepened, Ethan Rivers understood that this was no longer just about survival. It was about the cost of caring and whether he was willing to pay it again. Sophia Carter had spent her entire career turning crises into opportunities, but as she sat alone in her private office the morning after the fire, her reflection in the glass wall looked like a stranger. She had built an empire out of resilience and control, yet for the first time she felt both slipping from her grasp. Her body was stronger. Ethan's treatments had given her time, but her heart carried a weight she could not measure in charts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames swallowing Liam's small figure, felt the heat blistering her skin as she dragged him into the night. She had not thought, she had simply moved. And in those terrible seconds, she realized that saving him mattered to her as much as saving herself. That thought frightened her more than her disease ever had. Across the city, Ethan sat on the edge of a motel bed, his face lined with exhaustion. Liam slept soundly, curled against his pillow, the faint smell of smoke still clinging to his hair. Ethan traced a hand across his son's back, protective, unwilling to let go. His house was gone, every trace of Emily reduced to ash. The photographs, the wooden toy chest he had built with his own hands, the letters she had written before her illness. Years of grief and healing, burned in one night. He stared at the folder Sophia had given him, the research she had insisted he take. In those pages were answers, evidence of what his blood could do, a map to something larger than himself. She had given it away freely, no claim, no demand. He wondered if she knew how much that gesture meant to him, how it cracked open the armor he had built since the day Emily died. But danger still lingered. Victor Hale was relentless. The failed bribes, the fire, none of it deterred him. He had board members whispering in his ear, pushing him to seize control, promising that Sophia was weak, vulnerable, too reckless to protect the company. When Sophia returned to the boardroom, her posture straight, her voice steady, Hale launched his attack. He spoke of new gene editing therapies, of replacing the uncertainty of Ethan's blood with something replicable, marketable, profitable. He called it science. Sophia called it playing God with dice loaded against human lives. The room split, whispers filling the air, but Sophia did not flinch. She knew what she had seen, what she had felt. Her strength had not come from a lab. It had come from a man who had nothing left to give, yet gave anyway. That night, she went to the guest apartment where Ethan and Liam were staying temporarily on the Whitmore campus. She knocked softly, unsure if he would even open the door. When he did, the look in his eyes made her hesitate. He was exhausted, guarded, yet beneath it she saw the rawness of a man who had lost everything again in one night. "I didn't come to fight," she said quietly. "I came to apologize." He said nothing, but he did not close the door. "I crossed a line," Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "I was so desperate to understand you that I forgot the wall you built was protecting what matters most." His silence cut deeper than anger, but she pressed on. "I read everything. About Emily. About the warnings you filed. You weren't reckless, Ethan. You were right. You lost her not because you failed, but because the system refused to listen." His jaw tightened, his eyes closing for a moment, as if her words ripped open wounds he had long forced shut. "You didn't lose your career because you made a mistake," Sophia whispered. "You lost it because no one wanted to admit theirs." He looked at her then, eyes rimmed red but burning with truth. "I told them. I logged everything. I warned them she couldn't handle the mix. And they ignored me until it was too late." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They killed her." Sophia felt her throat tighten, her chest ache in empathy she hadn't thought herself capable of. Slowly, Ethan stepped back, opening the door just enough for her to enter. "Coffee?" he asked gruffly, as if the simple offer could mask the weight of what had just passed between them. She shook her head, her lips trembling into the faintest smile. "No, but I'd love some of Liam's cocoa." "3 marshmallows," Ethan said, and for the first time in years, something like peace flickered in his expression. Days later, a text arrived on Sophia's phone, one that stopped her in her tracks. "Hi, Miss Sophia. Tomorrow is my birthday. I didn't invite many people, but if you're not too busy, would you come? Liam. P.S. Dad doesn't know I'm texting you. Please don't be mad." Sophia read the words again and again. She had been invited to galas in Paris, summits in Geneva, to meetings that moved billions with a signature, but never had an invitation mattered as much as this one, written in the simple, hopeful voice of a boy who wanted her there. The next evening, she arrived quietly at the motel. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, no security. She carried a box wrapped in tissue paper, the bow clumsily tied by her own hands. When Ethan opened the door, surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by a dry remark. "You got his message." "I did," Sophia answered softly. "He's grounded for using my phone." Ethan's tone was stern, but his eyes betrayed a gentleness he couldn't hide. "But not tonight," Liam's voice chimed from behind him. The boy appeared, dressed in a bright shirt, his grin stretching wide as he launched into Sophia's arms. "You came," he whispered, as if afraid saying it too loud might break the moment. "Of course I did," she replied, her throat tight. Dinner was simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a store-bought cake with plastic figurines, but it was the laughter that filled the room, laughter Sophia had not known in years. Ethan's dry humor, Liam's playful teasing, even her own laughter that surprised her as it bubbled up, unrestrained. For a brief evening, there were no boardrooms, no fires, no illness, just a man, his son, and a woman who had been untouchable for too long, all sitting at a wobbly table sharing mismatched plates. Later, when Liam tugged her into the living room to show her family photos, Sophia stopped at a portrait. Ethan in uniform, arms wrapped around a woman with auburn hair, her eyes sparkling with life. Emily. The love in that photo was so clear, so unguarded, that Sophia felt her chest ache. Liam looked at her with solemn honesty. She was amazing. But sometimes I think Dad's been sad so long, he forgets how to be anything else. He's less sad when you're around. Sophia's eyes stung with unshed tears. As she left that night, Ethan walked her to the door. She hesitated on the threshold. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, "for intruding on your life, for not understanding." "You ate cake with cartoon figurines," he replied with the faintest smile. "You're absolved." Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. "She showed me your wedding photo," Sophia whispered. "She looked at you like you were her whole world." "She was," Ethan said quietly. "And now?" Sophia asked. He looked away, his voice low and rough. "Now I'm trying to remember what life feels like when it's not just surviving." That night, lying in the silence of her penthouse, Sophia realized she no longer feared the dark. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. And for Ethan, staring at the small box Sophia had left on the counter, a carefully chosen book for Liam, inscribed with a handwritten note, he realized that maybe, just maybe, survival was no longer enough. Something else was stirring, fragile but undeniable, pulling both of them toward a life neither had dared to imagine again. The city had grown colder, though perhaps it was only Sophia's perception. Meetings stretched longer, filled with murmurs about stability and succession, with Victor Hale seizing every opportunity to paint her as fragile, reckless, clinging to life on the blood of a stranger. She sat at the head of the boardroom table one morning, spine erect though her hands trembled beneath the surface. Dr. Harris, the new chief medical consultant, presented graphs and numbers, his voice clinical as he spoke of cerebral inflammation, neurological echoes, irregular sleep. The implication was clear. Repeated transfusions carried risks they did not understand. Sophia kept her face calm, but inside her stomach clenched. She had felt the symptoms flashes of déjà vu, nights where she woke disoriented, headaches she dismissed as stress. Now they had a name: damage. Victor seized the moment like a predator. "There's a cleaner solution," he declared, controlled, replicable, without dependence on one man. He spoke of gene editing, of CRISPR models that could mimic Ethan's blood in a lab. Science polished into profit. Sophia's voice cut through the air like steel. "No." The word froze the room. Victor pressed harder, accusing her of playing roulette with her life, accusing her of dragging the company down with sentiment. Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. "I've survived worse," she said quietly, and the silence that followed carried more weight than his tirade. But in private, alone in her office, the mask cracked. She poured water with shaking hands, her reflection blurred by tears she refused to shed. What if the cure was killing her? What if Victor was right, and her choice to depend on Ethan had already sealed her fate? Her thoughts spiraled until the door opened without a knock. Ethan never entered without permission. Victor did. He leaned against the frame, his smile bitter, his voice quieter now, laced with something that cut deeper than anger. "You think this isn't about us? You walked away from me, Sophia. You left me with a 3-sentence email and a company charter. I loved you." She turned her back, her voice low. "I loved you enough not to drag you into the fire with me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a blade. "And now, is Ethan the fire? Or is he the man who pulled you out of it?" She did not answer. She couldn't. He left her with one final warning. CRISPR is the future. James Rivers is not. Choose wrong, and you'll take the company and yourself to the grave. Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own confrontation. At the children's wing of a hospital where Liam was finishing a routine checkup, a tall figure intercepted them in the hallway. Victor Hale, immaculate in a charcoal suit, blocking their path. "Mr. Rivers," he said with a politician's smile. Ethan immediately moved his body between Victor and his son. "You're Victor Hale." "COO, former partner," Ethan said flatly. "I know who you are." Victor's smile thinned. "Then you know I'm here to save her from you." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Your blood is dangerous. It's destabilizing her, damaging her brain. She won't admit it, but she's unraveling. And when she dies, her board will erase you as if you never existed." Liam's hand tightened in his father's. Ethan's jaw set like stone. "Then maybe you should be talking to her, not threatening me." Victor's eyes glinted. "I already did. She won't listen. But maybe you're the key." He stepped closer, his voice oily. "Walk away. Let her accept CRISPR. If you stay, you'll bury her." Ethan's voice was steady, low enough that only Victor heard. "Stay away from us. This isn't a war you want." Victor's smile vanished, his face turning cold. "It already started," he whispered, "the day she let you into her bloodstream." That night, Sophia stood on the rooftop of the tower, the city sprawling beneath her like a battlefield she no longer controlled. She gripped the railing until her knuckles whitened, her mind echoing with Harris's warnings, Victor's accusations, Ethan's silence. The weight of it all pressed down until her chest ached. She wondered if she was killing herself with hope, wondered if she had pulled Ethan and Liam into danger they never asked for. Then her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "We need to talk tomorrow. Just us." Relief flooded her chest as she typed back one word, "Yes." But the storm that had been gathering around them would not wait. That night flames rose again, this time devouring the modest house Ethan had tried to rebuild for Liam. By the time Sophia screeched her car to a halt, smoke choked the air, and neighbors shouted in panic. Without hesitation, she ran inside, the heat searing her skin, the ceiling groaning as beams cracked. Somewhere in the smoke, she heard Liam's frightened cry. She dropped low, coughing, stumbling forward until her hands found his trembling arm. "I've got you," she whispered, wrapping him tight against her chest. They burst through the front door seconds before part of the roof collapsed, the fire raging behind them. Ethan arrived moments later, his car skidding to a halt, his face breaking with terror until he saw Liam alive in the grass, clinging to Sophia. He fell to his knees, pulling his son into his arms, his hands trembling as if to convince himself the boy was real. Sophia collapsed nearby, her palms blistered, her blazer scorched, her eyes never leaving Ethan. She had risked everything for his son, and in that moment, something shifted irrevocably between them. The next morning, the fire department called it faulty wiring. Ethan did not believe them. He had rewired that house himself, every socket, every switch. A neighbor swore they saw a man in a dark coat pacing the night before. Ethan knew then what Sophia had feared to say aloud. This wasn't an accident. He stood among the ashes, Liam pressed close to his side, Sophia watching silently. "You're not safe here," she said softly. His voice was raw. "I know." She stepped closer. "Then stay. Come into the compound. I can protect you." Ethan shook his head, the pain in his eyes sharper than the smoke. "No. You nearly lost your son," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Because of me. Because I let us get too close to a world that destroys everything it touches." Sophia flinched at his words, but he turned away, gripping Liam's shoulder protectively. "You think this was coincidence? That it happened 2 days after your ex threatened me?" She had no answer. His voice dropped, rough and final. "We're leaving today." Sophia's chest ached as she stepped closer, desperate. "Don't. You're the only reason I'm alive." He turned to her, his eyes clouded with grief. "And he's the only reason I live. I won't let him pay for a war he never chose." Hours later, Ethan loaded a duffel into the trunk of his car outside a long-term motel 2 towns over. Liam waited quietly by the door, his stuffed toy poking from his backpack. Sophia stood by, not to argue but to see. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. He closed the trunk, his face unreadable. "I don't belong there either," her voice softened. You belong with people who see you for who you are. Ethan looked at her, his gaze searching hers as if afraid of the answer. And what do you see? She swallowed, her words trembling. A man who's still grieving, still running, but also the only man who didn't walk away when I was at my worst. He said nothing, only stared at her, his silence more intimate than words. She handed him the folder then, the research she had copied and saved, every analysis of his blood, every note from her recovery. Keep it, she whispered. Start over if you want. I won't hold you back. He blinked hard, the edges of his control fraying. Promise me something, she added, her voice breaking. If I relapse again, don't come back out of guilt. Only come back if your heart tells you to. For a long moment he said nothing. Then in a voice that felt like gravel smoothed by rain, he whispered, If I come back, it'll be because I can't stay away. He brushed her cheek once, a fleeting touch, and then turned, leading Liam into the motel. Sophia stood in the parking lot long after they disappeared, the weight of his words pressing into her chest. She had always built her life on certainty, on deals and guarantees, but now her fate rested in something far more dangerous. The fragile hope that love, once broken, could still be chosen again. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?